In this video, I'm going to show you how to make the Lisette's neckband. So I've already applied my interfacing to the wrong side. First, I'm going to fold it right sides together, matching up the short edges. Probably used to doing that for just about any neckband. Then we're going to fold it again the other way. So now we have a fold along the bottom long edge and the fold that we made first, and then there's raw edges up here, and on the corner we've got our four corners right here, the raw edges. Next we're going to line up our folded neckband on our cutting mat with the 45-degree angle line on the cutting mat, because we need to draw a line going from these corners, these raw edges, towards the fold down here. So use your cutting mat and your ruler to help you make it nice and straight, and draw a line. And then I'm going to go to the sewing machine and sew on that line. And then I will show you what it looks like. Okay, I sewed it. If you use a serger, it's going to cut off the excess for you. But I'm just going to trim the extra fabric. And then when you turn it right side out, it makes a V. So then you just need to turn the whole thing with the wrong sides together and press it. And then close to the edge, you need to sew a basting stitch just along a couple inches along the point of the V to keep it nice and smooth for attaching. And that's how you construct the neckband. Now it's time to attach our neckband. So far I've sewn the ends of my neckband together to make the V. I've pressed it. I've sewn a basting stitch along the bottom of the V to keep it nice and sharp and smooth, and I've marked the back center of the neckband with a clip. I've also marked the center back of my shirt, and I've sewn a line of stay stitching along the bottom of the V, and this will prevent the fabric from getting stretched and distorted in this next step. Then I took my scissors and I clipped into the seam allowance almost to that line of stitching in the very center, and that's going to allow us to make the fabric do like this to attach the neckband. Okay, so first you're going to pin the center of the neckband to the center of the neckline on the shirt. It's really important that you line up that center seam of your neckband with that clip, that little slip that you made where you cut it. So I'm placing my pin right in the center of the seam, and after I pin it, I'm going to look at the wrong side and see that I can see the pin right in the center underneath where I cut. Then just pick a side and pin or clip a couple inches up along the neckline, and you don't need to stretch the neckband right here. Just pin or clip without stretching. Now we need to attach or pin the neckband to this side. So we're just going to pivot, pivot, pivot the neckband around, and you'll see when you do this, the fabric of the shirt gets like bunched up underneath, and that's fine. As long as the part where you're going to sew is smooth, it's fine that this is all bunched up. So clip or pin a couple inches on this side. You can see how that looks. So the bodice fabric has gone like this where we clipped into it to allow the neckband to be pinned on. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and with a long stitch, just sew the first couple inches on each side where you pinned it, and then you're going to check and see how you like it. And the reason we're doing that is because there's a good chance you're not going to have this perfectly centered the first time, like especially if it's the first time you've done it. So the long stitch is really easy to pick out if you need to redo it. It's no big deal. So I'm going to go sew that, and then I'll show you how it looks. Okay, so I sewed the bottom of my neckband, and I sewed it with the neckband on the bottom and the shirt fabric on the top. If you are very careful to make sure that your needle goes into your shirt fabric right underneath where you cut the slit into the seam allowance, and it goes through the neckband at the center seam, as long as it goes through at those 2 points, when you stop with your needle down and pivot, you're going to end up with it centered. So I flipped it over, I checked it, I'm happy with how it looks. If your seam is not centered, or if you have a pucker, or if there's anything you want to change, go ahead and just rip those seams out and redo it. It should not be very difficult because it was a short area that you stitched and you used a basting stitch, so that's easy to remove. But once you're happy with how it looks, we're going to go ahead and pin or clip the rest of the neckband up to the center. We're going to clip that right sides together. The reason we are doing one side at a time is because if you're sewing with the serger, the only way you're going to get a nice sharp V at the bottom is if you sew with your serger all the way to the point and just keep going straight off the edge, and then you come around the other side and go straight off the edge the other way. You can't really stop with your needle down and turn the fabric like you can with a sewing machine to get a sharp V. So if you're sewing with a sewing machine, you can do the whole thing at once if you want. You don't have to start at the middle and do one side at a time unless you just want to. Okay, so I'm clipping this neckband to the shirt, and up until I get about halfway up to the shoulder seam, I'm not stretching the neckband. You don't really need to stretch it. It's gonna lay flat even without it being stretched. You want it to be stretched when you attach it along the back and just the front, like near the shoulder seam. So I'm gonna line up the center of the neckband with the center of the shirt neckline. And here is where you'll see you have more fabric on the neckline of the shirt than you have neckband, so you're gonna stretch it here. Okay. So I'm slightly stretching the neckband, clipping it in place, and then once this is clipped, like I said, I can go to my serger and I can start from the center, go all the way around until you get to the center of the V, and then just keep sewing straight off. Or if you want to use your sewing machine, you can do the same thing. Or if you're using your sewing machine, you can clip the other side and do the other side at the same time. So that's up to you. If this is the first time you've made this, you might want to use a sewing machine and baste it. That allows you to just try it on and check that the neckband is laying nice and flat the way you want it to. And that's something I do with just about any knit garment. Actually, it's really helpful to kind of test out the neckband before you serge it on, because different fabrics behave differently, and if you're using a fabric that has maybe more stretch or less recovery than the pattern maker had in mind when they wrote the pattern, you might actually need to shorten the neckband a bit to get it to lay nicely. And it's much easier if you just baste it on first. Okay, so I'm going to go sew this, then I'll come back. I'm going to clip the other side in place the same way and sew that, and then I'll show you how it looks after that. Okay, so I sewed the area that I just clipped, starting from the middle and going down towards the center. Then I did the exact same thing on the other side. I stretched the back portion of the neckband. I kept this part relatively flat without stretching it, sewed it. So now my neckband's completely attached. I pressed the seam allowance away from the neckband. Then I will top stitch on the shirt about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, just so the seam allowance lays flat. Then it will be time for the grommets. We're going to put our grommets onto our Lisette sweater now. So the first step is going to be to measure and mark where the grommets go. And the pattern will say exactly how far to measure, starting from the center seam. So I've already done that. I have my 6 marks here. Then, if your grommet kit didn't come with a punch, some of them have a tool that will punch a hole for you. Mine does not. So I'm going to trace inside one of these grommets so I know how big to make the hole. I'm going to trace inside. Then I'm going to take some scissors and cut the hole. It's very, very important that you don't make this hole too big. You can always make the hole bigger, but you can't make the hole smaller. Okay, so I'm just folding it in half. And I'm cutting a hole, and I'm going to make it slightly smaller than I think it needs to be. Okay, so I have a hole. Now if you look at your grommets, there's a half with a post and a half that's flat. You need the half with the post to go in from the right side of the fabric. That's the part that you want to see from the right side. So I can stretch my fabric around the post, even though that hole is very small. It was fine. It's going around the post just fine. Okay. Now we're going to put the flat part on here. And your grommet kit came with a tool to attach it. So mine is this little anvil and this little top part that you hit with a hammer. So you're going to place your grommet into this anvil. Can you see that? I'll do it up here. Place it into the anvil. Put the top part on top of the post. The post is sticking up. And then hit it with a hammer. I don't hit it on top of my table. I put it on the ground outside. So I'll show you how that looks in just a second. Okay, and there it is, installed. So it's nice and smooth on this side because we put the half that has the post in from the right side. You can see on the other side, there's like a little ridge. So if you accidentally do it backwards, it's not a huge deal. You didn't ruin your shirt, but it should be the smooth side out. So you're gonna repeat that process on each of your other marks until you have all the grommets installed. So I'm gonna do that and then I'll come back and show you how it looks and we'll put the lace up tie in and it'll be done. And here they are installed. So I will say I probably should not have used a Sharpie to trace the holes because ink kind of made a mess. So use something washable. So now I'm using 3/4 inch twill tape for my tie. There's instructions in the pattern for how to make one out of fabric if you want. You could use pretty much any tie material you want. 1/2 inch twill tape would work too instead of 3/4 inch. It just doesn't stay in the grommet quite as well, like in the laundry. So when I lace it up, I do it like a shoelace and I like to go from inside toward the outside of the shirt. I'll just do it quickly so you can see. But you're gonna make sure yours is not twisted or anything. And there it is, your finished Lisettes.